Welcome back. Very happy to welcome this next guest on. This is going to be a recurring theme around here, and it's not because the folks at Lifebridge Sports Medicine Institute think that I need my head checked, but he is a concussion specialist and also the director of Lifebridge Sports Medicine Institute. You've been hearing me talk about it for a couple of weeks over at Foundry Row. He is with the Sports Neurology Center and comprehensive concussion program over at Lifebridge Health. And luckily for me, he has a sense of humor about how messed up my head might be. We welcome Dr. Kevin Crutchfield on. He will be a recurring guest, as will his partner, Craig Bennett, each and every week here. If you've driven by the new Wegmans and the whole thing that used to be the Cup Company that now has a big building that says Lifebridge under it, that's where Kevin is. Doc, good day to you, and I would say as Bugs Bunny, what's up, Doc? But I know it's another week in the NFL, and you sit around and watch this as a concussion specialist, and, you know, football's a dangerous game, isn't it? We're going to get together here every week and talk about it, but, you know, we saw Jimmy Smith running off into protocol with a minute left to go in the game on Sunday. You're never far removed in an NFL game from protocol, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, football, we don't even refer to it as a contact sport anymore. We refer to it as a collision sport. And the main difference is it is designed in the rules of the game to collide with someone else. And these players are faster, they're stronger, they're denser, and I don't mean dense as in, low IQ. I mean they're denser in that their body fat percent is down. So they're more muscle and bone. They've been lifting weights for a long time. And when you lift weights, you don't only build up muscle strength, you build up bone density. And by the way, that's why all your female listeners should be doing some degree of weight training on a frequent basis to help sustain bone mass. But these guys are big, and they're strong, and they're fast, and when they collide, it's just amazing no one dies with each collision.
Well, I stood on the field, and I know you stood on the field as well. Yeah, let me ask you this. You've been a doc for a long time doing head injuries, right? I've been a football fan longer than you've been a doc, and I remember dinged, buzzed, stinger. I remember all those terms from my childhood in the 80s and in the 90s, and then I go back and I watch the game film in real speed of the Ravens Super Bowl year back in 2000, 2 decades ago now, and I watch the way bodies were propelled and leading with the head. And look, the NFL's gotten involved in all of this, but from your very first day as a med school student, and I'm sure that was just a few months ago, when you first started watching football and were involved in concussion, what were your first thoughts as a medical person early on? Because you've been thinking about this a lot longer than those of us who saw the movie Concussion a few years ago, right?
Well, actually, it started before I even went to med school. In college, I was a student athletic trainer. You know, back in the day, there weren't as many athletic trainers around, so they had one athletic trainer, and students volunteered, well, we were actually paid a little bit, to be trained how to be athletic trainers. So back in my college days, I was a soccer player in the fall, but I was an athletic trainer for winter and spring sports, including lacrosse. So I'm quite familiar with management of concussions way back to my college days.
Well, how do you notice it? How do you recognize it? What do you do about it maybe then that maybe the NFL wasn't doing? Because I think all of this pressure sort of came from the medical community, right? And certainly from the victims of this to say, I'm hearing ringing in my ears, I haven't played football in 30 years. What is this? I don't know that the science of this has caught up to the science of, let's say, the cancer or whatever saved my wife's life, that miracle that happened twice in her leukemia side, that 40 years ago that would have killed her. Certainly 40 years ago, the way they were playing football, nobody thought twice about what it was doing to their head, right?
Well, you know, it's quite interesting. Money drives everything. They were thinking about it. That's why they developed helmets. As a matter of fact, I think it was Teddy Roosevelt almost banned the game of football because young men were dying on the fields of competition from head injuries. So they've been sort of tracking it and developing protective equipment. And then, you know, it's sort of as the league became more popular and started to gain more revenue, it kind of got pushed to the side because, well, we have helmets, that's good enough. And, you know, they weren't really tracking the injury data as accurately as they should have. Because as you said, it used to be, oh, just shake it off, you'll be fine. And, you know, a lot of the former players that I speak to, you know, they had the smelling salts on the sideline. So if someone got banged in the head and was a bit dazed, they sort of gave them this foul-smelling capsule that sort of shocked them into wakefulness. And
well, you saw Rocky. You had that in the corner in the Rocky movie, right? The smelling salts, and your head backs off of it. I mean, my dad had that stuff around the house when I was a kid. It was like, oh my God, it'll definitely wake you up, right? It'll clear your head, as they say, right?
Well, yeah, it's a shock. It'd be like throwing ice water on you. But that's not really, a great thing to do when we're dealing with the brain. And, brain injuries have been described by the military in monographs, medical monographs, way back, at least the United States, dating to the Civil War. So you can find descriptions of head injury from the Civil War, from the First World War, throughout Europe. There's some great papers coming out from the French literature regarding brain injury and neck injury following trauma on the battlefield. So the military has been tracking this for a while. Even Vietnam veterans had a wonderful, still ongoing longitudinal brain injury study called the Vietnam Veterans Head Injury Study to give us in the medical community some information on how to manage these patients. And it's interesting you bring up the NFL, because what happened was the contract between the players' union and the league was coming up, and a lot of this concussion awareness started coming to the forefront. And the reason it got shoved to the front is it became a tool for negotiation. And let's not forget that. I'm not going to euphemize anything. It became a tool for negotiation.
Well, in baseball with steroids, you're not going to have us pee in a bottle or draw blood to see if we're on steroids.
Right.
That became the negotiation with Major League Baseball, and football, it was the same thing, right?
Well, correct. But I think it's for the betterment of the players. We're much more aware of recognizing when someone, quote unquote, isn't right after they take a big hit. And that's really what the protocol's about is, it's let's bring them in, let's assess their brain function and make sure everything's okay for two reasons. If you get another concussion right on top of the first one, you can actually accelerate brain cell death. So it's dangerous to do that. And in younger athletes under the age of 23, there's something called malignant cerebral edema, where their brain swells so fast that they die. Second impact syndrome, the tailback from Frostburg a few years back, case in point. So we want to make sure that we're not going to put someone back in with their brain's at risk. But also, just as important, when your brain's not functioning, what I look for when I clear athletes is reaction time and balance. Those are the two things you need on the modern-day athletic field to keep yourself safe. If you go back and one of those things is compromised, you will be injured. And it may not be another brain injury, but it's a different type of injury, especially the speed at which these games are played these days.
Well, and we would say cloudy would be the feeling, right? And if you're cloudy, you don't have reaction time or balance, right?
Well, that's absolutely correct. You're distractible. As I like to say, when I'm on the sidelines of my old high school, I go back periodically and be on the sidelines, be a doc for the team. These kids sometimes stare like they're, a toddler at Disney World for the first time. They're looking at the bright lights like, oh, wow, it's you can tell. There's a real change in behavior and personality of a lot of these athletes. So the most critical thing is to get to know the athletes as people so that you can tell when there's an alteration of behavior.
Doc, I got a story for you. Dr. Kevin Crutchfield is here. He is at Lifebridge Sports Medicine Institute, and they're out at Foundry Row. He's the director there for concussions. We're going to be hearing from Dr. Craig Bennett on the orthopedic side. I may be having him take a look at my elbow. My elbow's a little screwed up, but my head's fine right now. At least my head's fine. Doc, it's funny you would say that because...
Well, we haven't talked about your head.
Hey, that's the second segment. We'll do that next week. We'll examine me.
Do we really have the time to get into that?
Would you like my wife to be involved in that too, my son? 2001, the week after 9/11, the Ravens played a road game in Denver. And I had no way to get home because the airline that was flying me back through Phoenix wasn't flying. So David and Art Modell said, Nestor, you get on the flight with us. It was the only time I've ever taken the charter flight home from a Ravens game because I had no way to get home. So I was waiting down underneath of Mile High, or the new Mile High, Invesco, whatever they're calling it. And Tony Siragusa came out of the game that day, and he was sitting sort of kind of on a curb underneath the stadium. And I walked over and I said, hey, Goose, man, how you doing? And he came up to me and he kissed me on the head and told me he loved me. And he left the game that day with a concussion. I tell him about it to this day. We laugh about it, we joke about it, but he had a concussion that day. He came up to me and kissed me and told me he loved me. That's when I knew this concussion thing is, the concussion doesn't last 5 minutes, that's for sure. This is an hour after the game, and he's still bleary-eyed to a large degree. And that's why they don't let these players talk to people in the media after these games, right?
Well, I don't know.
That happened. It's true.
I'm not going to comment on something I don't know about, but, I don't know if that's the reason they don't let them talk to the media. But, if someone's not right, you really don't want them under the rigors of media questioning. I mean, that just makes intuitive sense. But I don't know if that's an official policy, so I can't really comment.
I think it is an official policy. We don't talk to guys who have concussions in the games. They make sure they're not coming out and talking to the media when their head's not right, and I guess that was my point on Saragusa, which brings me to the field, because two things that are Raven-oriented the last couple of weeks, Doc, that I wanted to throw your way. One was Jimmy Smith came running off the field this week. We needed him on the field, right? In the old days, you'd send him back out there just because you needed Jimmy Smith on the field. You didn't want to lose the game without him out there. But he ran off, and he clearly had an episode where he rolled around. It clearly looked like it could have been his head. They took his helmet, and he ran into the little tent that they have now erected. And this is kind of a new thing as well. What happens? What is a concussion when they run off? How do they determine as quickly as possible to say yes or no? I don't know if there's a maybe button there. I don't know if there's a yellow button or not. But he was back out playing a few minutes later. What is that? What happens there?
Well, we don't know if it was. I don't know if it was concussion. I wasn't there. So there's lots of things they do in that tent. They assess everything now. But they don't want the media attention and the camera zooming in on the athlete that's injured. So that's why they put the tent up. But if it's a go no go. Right? So concussion is a go, no-go. And there's an initial screen, which is basically you assess the guy cognitively. You ask him questions. Is he oriented? Does he know what's going on? Does he know the time of day? Does he know, is he oriented, essentially? If they fail that, then they really go in for the whole, protocol inside the training room. But, if everything seems like it's working fine, their balance is fine, their eye tracking's fine, they're answering all the questions fine, all that can be done rapidly under the blue tent, and they don't give you a history or recollection of having a concussion, then they're cleared. They didn't have a head injury, it's something else. Because a lot of times they come out and they look dazed and, they're kind of stumbling, but they might have had the wind knocked out of them. So you don't know until you actually get hands-on patient as to what's really going on. I can see a bunch of hits on TV that may or may not be concussions. The ATC spotter up in the booth calls down hits that look like it might have been a concussion for the sideline team to go over and talk to the I call them patients, but the athlete, and see if they've sustained anything that might suggest that the brain has been rattled. So, we're a lot better at screening for it. So if they're in the tent, it's probably something else that happened and not concussion, although everyone thinks, oh, my God, it's potential concussion protocol, and that's what the announcers say. But they don't really know what's going on inside the tent.
Dr. Kevin Crutchfield is our guest. He is the director of the Lifebridge Sports Medicine Institute and Sports Neurology Center. He is in Foundry Row in Owings Mills. They are in the new building over there. I visit them often. We're going to be visiting with him, as well as Dr. Craig Bennett on orthopedics next week on a rotational basis, talking about head injuries, talking about maybe you, your family, your sports athlete, maybe you're a weekend warrior, maybe you need some help, and certainly a world-class facility. Doc, this is the point where I let you stretch out. Tell me about that facility over there, because I've known Neil Meltzer a long time. He told me this thing was coming online, and from all the research and having been in your building now a couple of times, this is literally a world-class, sort of a downtown center moved out into the suburbs, and led by you and Craig and guys that have been doing this a long, long time at a very high level.
Well, yeah, it's kind of unique. We're the only ones that have sports neurology, and like I said, I've been doing athletic training, sports medicine, former athlete, coached. I've been around athletics my entire life, practically. And I'm also a neurologist. I love the brain. I love how the brain functions. And it would only seem intuitively obvious that someone brings the two together. And it's not just about concussion. It's about overall athletic performance. So I started with a concussion program because Sinai Hospital has, one of the best brain injury rehab centers in the country, which is why I chose to work there, being recruited as a stroke doctor initially. and then looking around going, geez, we don't have a concussion program. We have mild brain injury programs, but who's focusing on athletes? And no one in town was doing it specifically, so I decided to initiate our sports concussion program. And that started growing into sports neurology. We started a fellowship, the first on the East Coast, and the fifth in the country, to train young neurologists how to focus on athletics and sports neurology. We graduated our first fellow. He's my partner, Dr. Andrew Guidry. And we have another fellow coming in July. It's a growing subspecialty of neurology, and we're part of that growth. You know, we do internal research. We're paying very close attention to all the details clinically of what we see in all the head injuries that we see. We're putting some cutting-edge information out into the medical community. I give lectures all the time. We write articles. We write book chapters. So, you know, we're sort of doing what we should be doing as a leader in medicine, and that's, you know, doing the best we can, constantly bettering ourselves by reviewing our data and seeing what's working and what's not working. It's like you said, it's sort of like being a downtown academic program, but we're out in the community. And Craig Bennett and I met, and we have a similar vision in that we don't want to just react to injuries when they occur. We want to start getting out in the community and preaching about preventive measures. What can we do in athletes to train them to reduce their risk of having these injuries, which can be critical? You'd rather not have an injury. If someone tells you, hey, you're running wrong, you're stressing your ACL, let's change the way you run and give them a running clinic, we can dramatically reduce ACL injuries in female athletes. And that data is out in the literature just by changing the way they run. Educating about concussion, you know, proper form and tackling is a big thing out in youth football, and we're highly supportive of that. The other thing we want to do is take athletes after they've been injured and work on retraining them to help reduce the risk of that injury. So it's not just working on the acute injury, getting them back to function. It's how do we, A, prevent the injury, treat the injury, but then train the athlete to get back to playing a sport they love and dramatically reducing the risk of re-injury.
A guy that's had chondromalacia on my knee back in 2006. I'm familiar with the rehab setting and how many young people are around. There are football players and soccer players and volleyball players and basketball players and all that. But the concussion side of things, this is car accidents, on the job, loud sounds, all sorts of things. And I guess in the old days, the car thing would be whiplash. We'd say, he got whiplash. It screwed his neck up. And you know, when your neck's screwed up, you're screwed up and all that. But you would say that the neck and the concussion thing are aligned to some degree, and I guess from a football perspective, the Alex Lewis injury a couple weeks ago that was brutal in Nashville, where he was boarded and taken off, and when it came back to John Harbaugh, he said, well, he has a pinched nerve in his neck. That's what it was. And then he didn't play for a couple of weeks, and now he's back out there and trying to find himself on the football field again. But the neck and the head, especially like in a car accident, right, which would probably be the most common thing my audience would, you know, much more so than playing football at our age. But how would a guy like me get a concussion or have something like that would lead me to you? You know, everybody's in a car every day, right? You see a lot of probably post-auto accident folks, right?
We see a ton of those. And I like to play medical trivia. So we'll start with you. We'll play a little game.
Oh, I'm not good at trivia. Come on.
But that's okay.
I got the internet. I can cheat.
But it's how people learn, right? So let me ask an open-ended question.
Sure.
How much does the average human head weigh?
I weigh 150 pounds. I think my head weighs 8 to 10% of my body. That's what I think. So I think my head weighs 15 pounds, maybe 16 because I'm a little smarter than some people.
Well, You're right on the mark. The average human head is 12 to 15 pounds. What else weighs 12 to 15 pounds?
A bowling ball.
Correct. So imagine sitting in a car.
I got that right?
You did.
I'm 2 for 2.
So imagine holding a 14 to 15 pound bowling ball in your hands in a car that's involved in a head-on collision going from 35 miles an hour to 0 miles an hour in less than a fraction of a second and trying to hold on to that bowling ball.
It'd be very difficult to do unless it was attached.
That's what your head is. It's a bowling ball attached to a peg. So all those structures trying to hold this bowling ball on top of a peg, but still allowing it to rotate and tilt to search for your next source of food. And as I like to say when I lecture, back in the day we had to look around and make sure we weren't someone else's source of food. So we had to be able to have our head on a swivel all the time to survive like these athletes do, right? But that mechanism is so susceptible to injury. And when these players get hit, if it's an unanticipated hit, meaning it's a blindside hit and they don't know it's coming, they don't tighten up their neck and shoulders. So their head bobbles, and that's a heavy head. Now put a helmet on, it weighs a couple more pounds.
Well, we've all seen that in HD and replays and slow-mo, right?
So the necks are getting strained. And in a car accident, oh my God, you're going forward so fast, and then the airbag deploys, and it's like Mike Tyson punching you square in the forehead, knocking you backward. That's how much force the airbag gives you. And if you don't think there's a lot of force going on, NASCAR now straps the heads of the drivers down because one of their top drivers hit a wall greater than 200 miles an hour, and he died instantly because his head popped off of his neck from the momentum, because the harness held his body still, but his head was still traveling at 200-plus miles an hour, popped it off the neck. So there's a lot of stress and strain that goes on with these types of injuries.
Well, I'm going to send everybody I know to you if they need anything, and obviously you're now our partner. We'll be talking to you every couple of weeks, as well as Dr. Craig Bennett will be talking about orthopedics. Dr. Kevin Crutchfield is the director of the Lifebridge Sports Medicine Institute and Sports Neurology Center, and yes, I have to read that because that's a mouthful. And the comprehensive concussion program over at Lifebridge Health, they're at Foundry Row, they're in Owings Mills. I will be bragging about them, talking to them, with them, and as we see, things happen on the field in different places, we'll be discussing that on a week-by-week basis. Doc, it's a pleasure to have you as a guest on the program. I'm looking forward to our second visit already, and at some point, I'm going to have you scan me all up and find out how my head's doing. How about that?
Well, you got to have something to look for to start with.
I'll make sure I put something in it. Right now, it'll be coffee, my friend. We'll see you in a couple weeks. I'll get out there and visit as well.
Great. It was great talking to you.
You got it. Dr. Kevin Crutchfield is over at the Lifebridge Sports Medicine Institute. They're in Owings Mills. If you're a weekend warrior, if you've got a weekend warrior in your family, if you've had a sports-related injury or a car-related injury or any related injury and you want to rehab, get back to full strength, and visit with experts, you need our friends at Lifebridge Sports Medicine Institute. Dr. Kevin Crutchfield does concussion and head injuries, and of course, Dr. Craig Bennett, who will be joining us next week, is a physician there in orthopedics, an orthopedic specialist. He worked at the University of Pittsburgh and all sorts of places, so we're going to be talking to these docs each and every week on behalf of Lifebridge Sports Medicine Institute, our newest partner. Very, very appreciative. Make sure you consider our friends at Lifebridge if you do have any of these traumas or accidents. Consider me when you're out there in the bye at Toyota.com Audio Vault. All of our programming during the bye week is going to be out there. Some Ravens, some Terps, some Orioles. Some Orioles, maybe, I don't know. We can't talk about the Orioles till they do something. Other than that, it's just me complaining about it, right? Nasty at WNST.net finds me. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook, as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. And our morning newspaper delivers digitally each and every morning at 7 a.m. It's all brought to you by Planet Fitness at PlanetFitness.com, where it's always 5 down and 10 a month to get in the best shape of your life. And there's a Planet Fitness right around the corner from you. Also, Laurel and Laurel Park, they're racing down there this weekend. Had the Breeders' Cup last weekend. They have remodeled Laurel, and if you haven't been there, it's phenomenal. Get down there, check out the new sports bar, sports book, and college football on Saturdays, the NFL games on Sundays, and they're running the ponies this week at Laurel Park. Also on the front of our WNST newspaper, as well as on the front of WNST.net. Any breaking news happens first on the WNST Tech Service. That's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Dennis Colatzos will be here on Thursday. I will be joining him. We are doing civic therapy around here for the 4 and 5 Baltimore Ravens, but hope that comes to an end when the Cincinnati Bengals come here next week. Dennis is worked up about that, and he provides our WNST Tech Service, so when there is breaking news, when the Orioles actually hire someone, anyone, you'll get it first in your pocket. It's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. I am a very available individual. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram. We stream live right here on our Facebook Live, as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.